MRI'd Trump without revealing to him what part they MRI'd, hoping to find out if he'd stuffed the Epstein files up his assisted living facility. There are 3 different 5-alarm fires in his one remark about the MRI he had, only he doesn't know what part they MRI'd, so that's 15 alarms. And, of course, there is also the chance of an actual fire, a fire in which Trump will order the Department of Justice to literally burn the Epstein files. One alarm at a time. Let's start with him saying he was MRI'd, but he doesn't know what part. There is the simple fact that that remark is part of a clear, public, unmistakable, ongoing mental meltdown about the Epstein emails and the Epstein votes and the Epstein files. The second fact is that he said this ever under any circumstances, that anybody said this ever under any circumstances. The third is something you might not have pondered. What if he's not lying? What if he wasn't just not paying attention? What if he doesn't know what part they MRI'd? How in the hell could that happen? First, exactly what he did say.
I had an MRI. Here's what the story is. I had an MRI. The doctor said it was the best result he has ever seen as a doctor. That's it. But I had an MRI as part of my standard yearly, or I think they do it every 2 years, but I have the physical every year. And the result was outstanding.
Is it your brain?
Did you know? I have no idea what they analyzed, but whatever they analyzed it well, and they said that I had as good a result as they've ever seen.
Okay, I will start from the back with my third point. What if he's not lying and he really doesn't know which part the MRI was for? What if he's not just stupid or so gone that he didn't notice which part the MRI was for? How could that be possible? How could you have an MRI and not know why or where? Wouldn't you have had to have been unconscious for it? Oh, is that the only way? I mean, even if they didn't tell you, wouldn't you figure it out just from how deep in the machine they stuffed you? Or if they gave you, say, a helmet to wear? Or if they said, turn your shoulder this way? Or based on all the other MRIs you've had in your life, wouldn't the only way for you to not know what they were MRIing would be if you were out? I had my first MRI in 1996. I think I can remember every one I've ever had and why. And I can remember the day I had one in the morning and they weren't satisfied, so they put me in again right after lunch. I can remember every time I wondered, what if I get stuck in here? Like that baseball player Ivan Calderon did with the separated shoulder, and they had to call the experts from the manufacturers at GE to take the machine apart to get him out. How could you not know? He has to have been unconscious. I mean, more so than usual, or at least heavily sedated, at least more so than usual. Giving Trump the benefit of the doubt, believing what he says, insisting he's not lying or not paying attention or is too stupid to know what an MRI is or how to spell it, and he's not too obsessed with being able to boast about a test, even if it's not that kind of test. Trusting Donald Trump. And the conclusion is, when they gave him his MRI on October 10th, they knocked him out first. Well, why in the hell would they do that? Other than, not wanting to hear him talk. The easiest explanation, some people have to be sedated. Rarely totally unconscious, but some people have to be sedated to be able to handle having an MRI. It's claustrophobic, and the taller you are and the heavier you are, the worse it can be. Trust me from personal experience. I will tell you that Ivan Calderon got stuck story later in this segment. Still, only somebody so disconnected from reality that his only concern about a test is if after it, teacher stuck a gold star on my forehead. Only that kind of person wouldn't know why he got an MRI, even if he was out cold for it. So maybe that does explain Trump and the MRI. On the other hand, there are a couple of new treatments for Alzheimer's that require frequent MRIs. Well, that's a coincidence. And infusions or injections, which could leave you with a kind of semi-permanently bruised or gray area on your, say, hand, if that's where they've been injecting or infusing. Well, that's another coincidence. Donanemab and lecanemab. And they are the I did my own research flavors of the month on social media. The problem with connecting them to Trump is they require infusions no more than 3 weeks apart. Okay, that checks. But according to the lecanemab official site, the MRIs are scheduled before the 5th infusion, then before the 7th infusion, which is like 3 weeks later, then prior to the 14th infusion, 14 weeks after that, and then the next MRI is 24 weeks after that. The more you read of that schedule, the more matching it to Trump becomes a conspiracy theory. He had an MRI and a cognitive test October 10th. We know he told everybody he had a cognitive test on April 11th. There is no indication he had an MRI in April. You could construct a scenario in which it matches the MRI schedule for lecanemab, but you're just constructing. Now, all that could be a lie. Or if Trump really doesn't know what part of the body the October MRI was for, maybe he doesn't know he had an MRI in April, or a series of them. Still, we are not QAnon here. We have absolutely nothing even to extrapolate from, so let's drop it for the moment. Just file it away somewhere. Docket it. More relevantly, they do not want you medicated for those checkup MRIs for the Alzheimer's drugs, let alone unconscious. Okay, the what if this is true idea boils down to the distinct possibility he really didn't pay attention and just got in the machine, sedated or not, and he only cared if he got 100 points for still having all his body parts. So we move on. My second point is not so easily dismissed, however. How crazy it is that he said this at all. I mean, for soundbite craziness, to me, this one is up there with the doped-up kid asking, is this real life? This real life. This doesn't need great analysis. Trump's nuts. But the first point, Trump is melting down over Epstein, and this whole thing about the MRI and everything else he's been talking about is all connected to this.
If they had anything, they would have used it before the election. Okay? I can't tell you what they put in since the election. But if they had anything, you don't think they would have used it before the election? They would have gladly used it before the election.
Have you ruled out a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell?
I haven't even thought about it. I mean, I haven't thought about it for months. Maybe I haven't thought about it at all. You're just asking me a question.
Why can't you rule it
out? But I don't talk about that. I don't rule it in or out. I don't even think about it. You're going to find out what did he know with respect to Bill Clinton, with respect to the head of Harvard, with respect to all of those people that he knew, including J.P. Morgan Chase.
Sir,
yeah, Jennifer, go ahead. Go ahead.
In the file, sir, why not acting as a...
Everything else he's been talking about is all connected to this. Repeated posts insisting everybody has to stop talking about Epstein. More and more proof, therefore, of the Streisand Effect. The almost ritual sacrifice of Marjorie Taylor Greene because she suddenly started talking like a normal person. And I swear to God, she sounds exactly like somebody sounds when they've just quit using steroids. Quote, a hotbed of threats against me are being fueled and egged on by the most powerful man in the world, the man I supported and helped get elected. Aggressive rhetoric attacking me has historically led to death threats and multiple convictions of men who were radicalized by the same type rhetoric being directed at me right now, this time by the President of the United States. As a woman, I take threats from men seriously. I now have a small understanding of the fear and pressure the women who are victims of Jeffrey Epstein and his cabal must feel. As a Republican who overwhelmingly votes for President Trump's bills and agenda, his aggression against me, which also fuels the venomous nature of his radical internet trolls, the political industrial complex, and the toxic, violent nature of American politics must end. Our country is worth saving, and it can only be done if we pull together and save ourselves. I mean, honestly, 9/10 of that could have been said by Liz Cheney. One of my favorite cliches is the political media industrial complex. My God, she and I might be related. The Congresswoman's response is apparently heartfelt enough that her boyfriend, Brian Glenn of Real America's Voice, the propaganda channel, put out a series of posts yesterday supporting her. I love this woman, he wrote. and with pictures. Understand, Brian Glenn's channel, job, his career, it's predicated on shilling for Trump. This is the guy who attacked Zelensky last winter for not wearing a suit. Before Trump, Brian Glenn was a TV reporter in Dallas. Features, not news. In 2014, he was covering the Texas State Fair Wild West Pet Palooza and trying to address the thorny question of what a shelter dog would do to get a corn dog. That is how too far they think Trump has now gone. Brian Glenn is willing to risk being put back on the Texas TV News corn dog beat. Live, local, and late barking. Sorry. Then there's Thomas Massey yesterday. Donald Trump can protect you in red districts right now by giving you an endorsement, but in 2030, he's not going to be the president, and you will have voted to protect pedophiles if you don't vote to release the files. And the president can't protect you then. This vote, the record of this vote, will last longer than Donald Trump's presidency. I didn't know any Republicans knew that. You already know Trump's attorney general 4 months ago declared that there was nothing left on Jeffrey Epstein, nothing in the files that merited prosecuting anybody. Trump, deflecting, has declared that Attorney General Blondie should be investigating Bill Clinton. So now she's investigating Bill Clinton, even though there's nothing in any of the tanks, because there's nothing left on Jeffrey Epstein that merited prosecuting anybody. And Trump has resumed calling the Epstein and Trumpstein and pedophilia nightmares a, quote, hoax. So he wants Bill Clinton prosecuted for it, but it's a hoax. So Trump wants Bill Clinton prosecuted for it, but it's a hoax. So Trump wants to... I give you now Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who, unlike me, seemingly has not lost his mind about this, at a Texas Tribune event. This is basically perfect. Senator Murphy is playing out of Fs. No Fs given, no Fs left to give. Completely F-free.
These files and the fullest truth that we have available to us is going to be made public. And it is clearly the biggest scandal in presidential history. And he wouldn't be acting this way if he wasn't so deeply worried about what sits in those files. What we've already seen is immensely incriminating. Clearly, Donald Trump was at the center of a child sex ring. That is heartbreaking that the president of the United States was involved in that kind of gross, craven immorality. And it stands to reason that he wouldn't be fighting so hard to spin against this story or bullying Republicans in the House to prevent the release of these files if there wasn't something especially and specifically incriminating in that information. Now, I think the scandal in and of itself could bring him down, but we also do have to contextualize it, because what Donald Trump is all about is protecting the rich and powerful and stealing from normal people, regular middle class and poor folks, in order to enrich the rich and powerful. And this is very much part of that story. Yes, I am sure that there are both Republicans and Democrats named in those files. There are powerful people on both sides of the aisle. But what Trump is all about is, not really playing a game based on politics, but playing a game based on wealth and influence. If you have wealth and influence, Donald Trump is going to protect you. And that is consistent through everything he has done during the first 9 months of this administration.
Wow. And I will add, with my first actual astonishment in months, yikes. This leads us to ask, therefore, how far Trump will now go to bury the Epstein files. I mean, now that his government shutdown to prevent the vote ran out of viability, and yes, there's already a partial answer. He's willing to comey Bill Clinton, fake prosecution, fake indictment, fake trial, fake prosecutor, just to delay the deluge. Brian Beutler says the ultimate step in this regard is theoretically possible. To quote him, Trump could order DOJ to destroy Epstein file evidence. I'd bet an irresponsible amount of money, he writes, that he has already barked this order at Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, but to no avail. Unquote. Well, why would they hesitate here? personal responsibility. This is, no matter who told you to do it, destruction of evidence, a huge crime. And guess who could be charged with it? Trump, Bondi, Patel, and anybody who helped. Still, it is important to remember that Alexander Haig told Richard Nixon to burn the Watergate tapes in the Rose Garden with the press present. Haig also insisted Nixon asked him to burn the tapes, and Haig said he refused because he knew they would prosecute him into the ground. Quote, "Get Manolo to do it," Haig said he told Nixon. Manolo Sanchez was Nixon's valet. He was his Walt Nauta. Nobody burned the tapes. Haig said it was his biggest regret. They didn't burn them ultimately because many of Nixon's advisors still believed they were exculpatory and Nixon was innocent and the tapes would prove it. Oops. Emoji. So if you don't destroy the evidence and investigating Bill Clinton gets you nothing, would Trump think bigger than that? Destroy not the Epstein files, but destroy the process by which Trump could be punished for whatever is in the Epstein files. Does he see it as some sort of existential moment requiring the whole ball of wax? Do those looking to succeed him in MAGA see it as such? Is there a potential MAGA coup over Epstein? Is that what Trump is really trying to preclude here? Not so much the Epstein tapes destroying Trump, but other MAGA doing so. Look at our false prophet. He failed us on Epstein. Nice apparatus he built. We'll keep that, but let's lose this guy. The guy doesn't know what part of him got MRI'd, the drip. What was that guy we had before J.D. Vance? What was his name again? Lump? Greg Sargent talked to the historian Nicole Hemmer, who has written books about the real internal convulsions on the right, below the seeming surface of robotic, cultish, uniform worship of Trump. And she said, I am watching people like Vance and the factions around him because, again, this sort of civil war that has broken out on the right involves this idea of something called post-liberalism, which is an idea of a post-democracy society, a more authoritarian, strongman society that isn't in any way reliant on Donald Trump. It could have J.D. Vance as its figurehead. It could have some of these techno-totalitarian elites as part of its head. There is a real philosophy on the right that is, many ways, post-democratic. And that's the faction that I'm watching because it actually seems like the faction that has the most momentum behind it at the moment. Ms. Hemmer, you always brighten my day. She continues, I think it's very possible that because people want him to be the strong man, the authoritarian, she's talking about Trump here, that in order to try to overcome this particular scandal in his administration, he is going to attempt to appease his base by seizing even more power and hurting even more people, which is entirely possible in order to feed what it is they want. So I do still think that even though it could end up being a moment of real weakness and a moment we look back on and say, well, that was the end of Donald Trump's power, it could just as easily be the impetus for another power grab. And so I think we need to take it seriously. Okay, I got the last part covered. Thank you, Ms. Hemmer. Well, isn't that special? A Trump response to Trumpstein that has him shutting down any part of the government that might be used to getting the Epstein files out, or any part of the government that might be used to blame him for Epstein, or anything else that might divert. So if he escalates, my boy Beutler says, the resistance should escalate too, even if it is Chuck Schumer and the Quisling Eight. He writes, Democrats have happily held their own in the gerrymandering fight. That is to their credit, but they could be clearer about why Trump is so desperate to rig the House elections to keep the Epstein files concealed. And if that's how he sees the stakes, so be it. The midterms will be a referendum on whether Trump's pedophilia cover-up should be allowed to succeed. Once again, yikes. There is a bigger picture here that should be acknowledged. Stage one of taking Trump down via the Epstein files, even if it means the midterm, is keeping the story alive for another year. Let's go. If Trump attacks Venezuela, this might be a problem. American reporters like wars. They're easy to cover. You just have to show them pictures of them bombs blowing up. On the other hand, If Trump just keeps posting about how nobody is allowed to talk about Epstein, that's a different world, and we can win that one back. It's a different world with different things blowing up. I promised you the Yvonne Calderon MRI story. If you actually are claustrophobic, first off, you know how you find that out? Get in an MRI. That's where you find out whether or not you're actually claustrophobic at all. If you are, go forward, hit the go forward like 30 seconds, maybe twice. Okay, he was a barrel of a man. He was an outfielder. He was listed at 6'1", maybe not, and 220, maybe early in life. He hit 300 once for the Montreal Expos. His teammates adored him. He died violently, shot execution style in Puerto Rico 23 Christmases ago. One story was drug dealers demanded he give them his son, who was messed up and mixed up with them, and they were pursuing him, and he refused, and they killed him. In any event, in his playing career, he tore up his shoulder, and in the relatively early days of the MRI, late 80s maybe, he was getting it imaged, and all was going well until they had him turn slightly while he was in the tube, and then they finished, and they began to withdraw him from the machine, and he began to scream, because in turning, he had further separated the shoulder, and now he was broader than he was when he went in, so he was stuck. Again, early in the history of MRIs, so supposedly the hospital had no real experience with this and what to do about it, and they had to call in the experts, and the experts were at the company that made the machine, GE, and the technicians were at the GE headquarters for MRIs, which was 2 hours away, and they had to come and take the machine apart, which took another couple of hours to get them out. So they have improved emergency procedures since then with MRIs, I'm told. And speaking of the feeling of being stuck inside an MRI for hours with no way out, there's working with Stephen A. Smith. Or just watching him. The ESPN chief time waster has apparently rededicated himself to self-immolating by going into political commentary when he doesn't know anything about political commentary, and he will not bother himself to do any preparation. I mean, just get some basic facts and stuff. Have somebody print something out for you. Put it in front of you. He has made a fool out of himself every time he has opened his mouth on this subject. Actually, it's terrific. It's wonderfully entertaining. Stephen A. Smith insisted that if there had been anything damaging in the Epstein files, the Democrats would have released it long ago. Therefore, and he alone could figure it out this way, that since the Democrats did not release the latest dog that didn't bark and hours at my home with such and such emails during last year's presidential campaign, those emails can't really be damaging. As the reporter Julie K. Brown of the Miami Herald, who is the expert on the Epstein prosecutions, noted, what Stephen doesn't understand is that the emails released last Wednesday are from Epstein's estate. They were obtained from Epstein's lawyers pursuant to a subpoena that was issued by the House Oversight Committee, i.e. lawmakers. These documents are separate from the criminal case files held by the DOJ and the FBI that Trump and Bondi promised to release after the election, unquote. In other words, these emails, the ones we got last week, are new to the public gaze this year. And separately, why didn't the Democrats release what they had access to last year? Well, the case wasn't resolved. Until last October, Ghislaine Maxwell's last appeal went on to October 2024. You cannot empty your evidence files while you're still at trial, while you are still investigating others. And by this point, Stephen A. Smith has lost interest in details, and he is pursing his lips. It's his only skill. It's not his only fail. I am delighted to report Stephen wins the Professor David Dunning-Kruger Effect Trophy for the month by coming back in the new episode of his new politics show, which is, I think, called I Know Nothing About Politics, But I Know It Loudly, by saying this, quote, Jasmine Crockett and AOC have been invited on this show for 4 months. Gavin Newsom has been invited for longer than that. Chuck Schumer's been invited on this show. Hasn't shown up. Where they at? Well, Stephen, since for once the obvious has not occurred to you, and you haven't then followed it by taking the obvious and talking about it nonstop for 4 days on TV, I'll fill you in here. Crockett and AOC and Newsom and Schumer think you're a moron and a right-wing dupe and a waste of time, Steve. That may be your answer right there. Also of interest here, no, I am not going to analyze the Olivia Newsy profile in the New York Times in advance of my ex's book release. But maybe later. Right now, I will add to one anecdote in it, which describes the start of her career. Her first-person expose of Anthony Weiner's disastrous run for mayor of New York in 2013 when she became an intern. As we discussed the merits of this and the appropriateness of it, she just wanted practical political experience before she became a political writer. I thought it was a good idea. And then she came home one day and she told me the story about how everybody on the Anthony Weiner campaign was just hoping to meet Mrs. Weiner and get on the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016. And I laughed, and she told me the other stories of him getting everybody's name wrong, and I wowed, and she said, "Should I write this?" And I said, "Well, ethically it's kind of close, but yes, please." And she was about to hit send on an email when I asked her what that was, and she said she'd written it, and she was sending it to a friend of hers who had a weekly political blog with 100 readers or so, and she was going to do a guest post for him. And I said, "Are you crazy? That should be in the New York Post or the Daily News. It's not only great and really well written, it's actually news. People should know this." And she said she didn't know anybody at the Post or the News, and I just smiled, a sitcom smile if ever I gave one, and I gave her all the contact info I had, and I said, "Cold call these people. Somebody will buy it from you. Leave my name out of it." And the next day, her story was on the front page of the New York Daily News, and under it was a giant glam shot of Anthony Weiner? No, sir. Uma Hamadad? No, sir. A glam shot of Olivia Newsy. And the rest is history. More later, maybe, because there's a lot. The RFK Jr. stuff, that wasn't her first rodeo in Crazy Town. I just want to find out what she says first. She defines the perimeters and the barriers, especially if she goes on TV. Maybe she'll go on Fox or MSNBC, MS Now, and she'll be interviewed by Laura Ingraham, or she'll be interviewed by Katie That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
The exact anniversary is, let's see, this is the 16th, that was the 11th, so it was last week, middle of last week, nearly a week ago. If you know this story, you'll know already whether or not you want to hear it again. It is the story of my dog, Mishu, gone now for 4 years, and yet anything but forgotten. Ahead in the last segment of the show. First, believe it or not, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's other worst persons in the world. Bronze J.D. Vance, JV himself, now new and improved, Botoxed to the legal limit, clearly, and with a kind of Dan Bongino quality to his hairline. Is Vance going bald? It looks like some of his hairline has been drawn in. And did the Botox get into his brain? Quote, a lot of young people are saying housing is way too expensive. Why is that? Because we flooded the country with 30 million illegal immigrants who were taking houses that ought by right to go to American citizens. This is either the worst of J.D. Vance's lies, or more likely, he actually believes this, and there's something medically wrong with his brain, too. Because he wasn't this dumb even a year ago, let alone when he managed to completely write a book. A lot of young people are saying because the houses, 30 million illegally owned homes, I guess. The average home price in the United States is now approximately, based on the second quarter of this year data, $512,800. The median home price, which would probably be a little bit easier to use as a barometer, $410,800 in the second quarter of this year. So the median price for a house is more than $400,000. So the J.D. Vance bête noire, the illegal immigrants, they're stealing all the SNAP money that they don't actually need, right? They're eating pets, all right? And, of course, they practice witchcraft. Well, no, he hasn't said that yet, but give him time. And they each somehow find $400,000 to $500,000 apiece to buy houses so you can't have one. Over here in this dimension, JV, immigrants, as it turns out, actually drive down the price of homes because the immigrants are cheap labor. And I'm not endorsing this. I'm just saying what is true. Undocumented immigrants drive the price of homes down even further because they are even cheaper labor. Again, I'm not endorsing that, nor do I think it's a good idea. I'm just saying what reality is, as opposed to what this asshole Vance says. Yeah, the immigrants are stealing all the gold from Fort Knox, too. And they stole several of my chins. You know why they picked him. You know why he is supposedly the heir apparent. He's the heir apparent because too many people during the first Trump administration said, well, yeah, but yeah, we get Mike Pence as the president then. And, he'd be easily influenced by people, but he's not, I don't like him, but he's not Trump. Now they're looking at Vance and going, I don't know. The runner-up, Trump's son, Eric. Moron twin number 2 on the air with Maria Bartiromo. So the total IQ still was in single digits between the two of them. He said this, you can send $500 million worth of Bitcoin on a Sunday night at 11 p.m. while having a glass of wine with your wife for virtually zero fees. In addition to the let them eat cake crudités, it's one banana, Michael, how much could it cost? $500 million? To this duffel bag-headed moron's remark, in addition to that quality, I'd like to focus on just the last part of that quotation from Eric Trump. While having a glass of wine with your wife for virtually zero fees. While having a glass of wine with your wife for virtually zero fees. So, Eric, you're saying your wife usually charges you fees to have a glass of wine with her? Actually, that makes sense. I mean, seriously, people look at that family and obviously Trump's out of his mind and Trump Jr. is the girls are really not that bright. Barron, as we've discussed many times, is the smartest one because we've never heard him speak in public. But as an underrated candidate for the dumbest person in that family, Eric really is the sleeper in this, which is what his brain has been doing since at least the 90s. But our winner, Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly had her own Sirius XM channel until sometime late Thursday morning. A career ender if ever I have heard one. This is when Megyn Kelly decided to explain that Trump's friend Jeffrey Epstein was not really a pedophile. Say what? Let's let Meghan explain herself into a professional grave.
I've said this before, but just as a reminder, I do know somebody very, very close to this case who is in a position to know virtually everything. Not everything, but virtually everything. And this person has told me from the start, years and years ago, that Jeffrey Epstein, in this person's view, was not a pedophile. This is this person's view, who was there for a lot of this, but that he was into the barely legal type. Like he liked 15-year-old girls. And I realize this is disgusting. I'm definitely not trying to make an excuse for this. I'm just giving you facts. That he wasn't into like 8-year-olds, but he liked the very young teen types that could pass for even younger than they were, but would look legal to a passerby. We have yet to see anybody come forward and say, I was I was under 10. I was under 14 when I first came within his purview. Look, you can say that's a distinction without a difference.
No, it's not.
I think there is a difference. Yeah. There's a difference between a 15-year-old and a 5-year-old. You know, it's just whatever.
Now that's bad enough. I'm not saying there's a difference, she's saying, but here's 2 minutes on why there's a difference. But of course, Megyn Kelly is completely contradicting, on top of just what she said there. She is utterly contradicting an authority on this subject, one that she has publicly relied on in the past, an authority on this subject of definitional rape. The authority is named Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly, same one, once slammed those who were defending Russell Brand against rape charges because the victim was 16. Statutory rape charges. She attacked the people defending him. And then there was Megyn Kelly's disastrous NBC show in 2018, where one day she said exactly the opposite of what she just said, trying to excuse Epstein.
To people who are going to be out there, because you know some are going to judge and say, you were 15, you were 16, you were 17, you were a willing participant. Again, the legal age of consent in California is 18, so there's no consenting for a 14 or even a 17-year-old in these circumstances.
I don't really care if it turns out that the rape charge or the sexual assault charges fall apart. You're 31 years old and you have sex allegedly over a 3-month period with a 16-year-old. We're done. I'm unsubscribing, all right? And I am sick of conservatives online trying to defend that as though she had a role in it. She was a minor. Just because you can't be prosecuted for it doesn't mean it's right.
The other problem with that 7-year-old tape, and obviously it's video, resurfacing to show that Megyn is now trying to find excuses for Epstein and Trump and not doing it very well and has a screw loose. The other problem, besides the total self-contradiction here, is that old video shows that Megyn Kelly used to have cheeks, like a normal-looking woman, before she did whatever she has done to herself in the interim, appearance-wise. You know, how she has wound up looking like the lead character in Edvard Munch's painting, The Scream. But that's beside the point. The point is, she's a worthless hypocrite trying to explain away Epstein, the pedophile, and by extension, trying to explain away Trump, the pedophile protector. Megyn Kelly. And the new online name for her is perfect, and now it is permanent. Megyn R. Kelly. Oh, today's other worst person in the world. Megyn R. Kelly. When my friend Sue from Maltese Rescue called again in August of 2021, she said, I have a really, really tough case this time, and I do not think there is a chance that there could be an unexpectedly positive outcome like the one you've had with Ted. She said, this is a puppy. He's barely 3 months old. The family loves him. They adore him, but they're 2 young kids. And frankly, the mother believes accurately that they are just too young to watch this little dog die. His name was Mishu. They were a Polish family. Polish for little bear is Mishu. And the disease he had was tetralogy of Fallot. If that sounds at all familiar to you, in a human child, it can be repaired now. It used to kill children by the time they were 10. But in a human child, they can now do surgery, but the surgery lasts about 12 hours. Jimmy Kimmel's son had it. He talked about it a lot when he was talking about the healthcare system in this country. In dogs, there have been some early experiments in surgery, almost exclusively for bigger dogs. As of Mishu's time, they really had not succeeded on any dog less than, say, 20 or 25 pounds. If you've ever seen the drawings of M.C. Escher, the famous illustrator, where the same staircase goes up and down at the same time, that's what a heart afflicted with tetralogy of Fallot looks like. There are arteries going over the heart and under it, and others that take the oxygenated blood in the wrong direction. The sufferer of tetralogy of Fallot never gets enough oxygen. In August 2021, Mishu arrived. It's easy to romanticize things like this, especially in retrospect. There was something magical about him, though. He was very, very sick. His tongue and gums were purple from the lack of oxygen. He was tiny, dwarfed by my other 3 dogs, and because he was 3 months old. And yet he would start trouble with them, silently charging Ted or going up and yapping at Stevie, and soon getting all 3 of them playing and fighting with each other, and that's all the strength he had. A minute of this tops, and he had to sit down and simply watch the chaos he had created and clearly loved to create. And he also clearly loved them. If 2 of the dogs were lying near each other but not together, he would lie in the empty space between them, deliberately, so that his head rested on one and his pack paws on or against the other. And soon they would respond to his presence by arranging themselves and cuddling together with a space for him. They had not done that before Mishu came. Once I was stretched out, legs up on my couch, and the 4 of them climbed in, 2 by my feet, 2 by my knees. I called Mishu's name, and he turned and he looked at me, and then the 4 of them almost simultaneously fell asleep. It was such a simple thing, yet easily it remains one of the most extraordinary and wonderful moments of my life. And I prayed that night, and not for the last time, that if there was no miracle meant for Mishu, that at least when he left us, he would be in my arms when he went. Mishu was an athlete. He just was an athlete who had no stamina. In the pen I'd keep him in for his own safety when I had to go out, he would get up on his hind legs and stand. I would come back and see him standing in his pen. Or try to get out of his pen. Once he did get out of his pen, I came home and he was marching around the house. And he did that confidently around the place. And he loved to move and to run and to play, and then he would have to stop. Mishu also enjoyed food as much as any dog I have ever known, more even than Minet. He gained almost 1 pound a month while he was with me. If you approached him with a treat, he would literally punch the air with one of his front legs like an athlete celebrating a success, often with one and then the other, a little 1-2 punch like a boxer. And the sheer joy of that never failed to make me smile and laugh. And I often go back to look at the video when I need to smile or laugh. Put him on his back next to you, jab a finger at his paws, and you'd be in a boxing match with a 4-pound puppy who exulted in duking it out with you. And you always knew when the fight was over, Mish would stop throwing hands or throwing paws, and he would simply take his front paws and grab onto your finger and hold. He once did this for a solid minute. I have never felt more as if I were truly communicating with a dog than when Mishu would hold my finger. Knowing his attitude, I really am surprised he didn't pull my finger. He was an extraordinary happy puppy, even when he felt bad physically. Those were harrowing times. Mishu would be sitting on my lap or walking on the floor or just chilling with the other pups when he would suddenly tense up, sometimes letting out a cry. Twice that cry was exactly like that of a young human boy. It was such a startling sound, so clear, so unmistakable, so unbelievable, that the other dogs would stop and stare with what could genuinely be described as a look of alarm. Most times the tensing was my cue to grab him and hold him as tight as I could, because that inability to get oxygen to all the parts of his body, particularly the brain, of course, would cause his body to contract and writhe. And if he was on any surface other than the ground or the floor, it could literally throw him off a couch to the floor. It was rigid, and then he would snap, and then he would fall. The first time he did that, my veterinarian was here, and she said, "You may now have to take him to the emergency room." She said that's essentially what a dog does just before he faints. But then within seconds, it would stop. His body would relax. More or less by accident, I discovered that after one of these seizures, he seemed to be soothed if I would carry him and walk him around, gently rocking him in my arms and talking to him as I did so. Mishu and I solved a lot of the world's problems in those little walks, out in the fresh air, on the balcony, or just around the house. He would often doze off, but just as often he would within minutes be ready to start playing again. And so I had, in my little flock of 4 lovely dogs, a sweet, wise, serene, playful puppy who liked to grasp my finger with his paws and loved everything about life, who was wise beyond his years. And he was dying. Well, I could not try to find out if there was something to be done to make his life longer or happier. Of course, I knew what sadness this was, this extraordinary soul, trapped in a body that would betray him at any time, but certainly, no matter when that happened, it would be before his time. So I had to at least try to see if something could keep him here longer, or at least make him feel better while he was with us. We went to see the city's top cardiologist for dogs, and there was not, although he thought keeping those cans of a minute's worth of oxygen you sometimes see football players breathing from on the sidelines, he thought that might help a little relieve the pain. Soon I had dozens of those cans of oxygen in a hall closet, and I was discussing building him an oxygen tent. But the problem wasn't his breathing. He got all the oxygen he would normally need. It was finding some way to get the oxygen pumped by his fatally flawed heart to carry the oxygen around his body. It's fine if you have all the cabs in the world and there are no roads. Well, there was no way to fix this. The median age of survival with dogs with tetralogy of Fallot was just about 2 years. His cardiologist brought up his case on a board of international experts in canine cardiac care, and they agreed there was no chance he would survive any operation, let alone the experimental surgery for this devastating malformation. Thus, the visits to the hospital turned out to be more about letting people meet him and hold him. There was an extraordinary soothing quality to holding Mishu. I heard it again and again from people at an animal hospital. What a special little soul. And he loved to be held. I took him everywhere they would let me take him. He was a regular at my weekly physical therapy for my arthritic joints. My therapist adored him. She'd just hold him and tell him stories. I took him to the Apple store once. I am happy to say he did not like that at all. He went with me and the other dogs for walks. He didn't walk. He was always in a bag draped over my shoulder. He did not have the stamina to walk for very long. I never saw him fall asleep on a walk, though. The world fascinated him. The inevitable finally came at this time of year in 2021. Throughout the last week, the little pre-faints increased. Mishu's happiness did not decrease. 2 days before the end, I approached him with a treat with my camera phone rolling. He punched with the left, and then he punched with the right, and he ate the treat, and he licked his purple lips, and when I surprised him with a second treat, he did it all over again. On the afternoon of the 12th of November, 2021, I was holding Mishu in my lap as I sat and looked at the peak foliage in Central Park. Then, with no warning, he suddenly let out that near-human cry, and I held him, and I stood up, and I walked him around the balcony again. And then I had to sit him down in his pen for a second, and I was just picking him back up when he tensed up, just like all the other times, and died. Died as I picked him back up. The special little soul was gone. His body was getting cold with stunning rapidity. And something inside me calmly said, not yet. I just don't think he's ready. And with no training and absolutely no clue what I was doing, I tried CPR on him. You have to try. You have to try. I had so little idea what on earth I was doing that after breathing air in and out of his lifeless body, I moved my face away as if I were going to spit out water before reminding myself, no, dummy, that would be for drowning. He didn't drown. He had a stroke or a heart attack. I must have done 5 or 6 breaths and was thinking, how long do I do this before I say goodbye? When I heard him exhale, I waited for it to stop or to be a false alarm or some sort of physical oddity caused by all the air I had pushed into his lungs, but it wasn't any of that. Damned if this little dog had not somehow taught me how to resuscitate him. He was alive. Then he was dead and getting cold. Now he was alive again with a regular breath and, for him, a regular heartbeat. It was rush hour on Friday afternoon, and there was a bottleneck and a bridge approach between Mishu and I and the hospital, and I had visions of being stuck in traffic for half an hour or Lord knows how long, and almost nothing they could do for him then if we somehow got there in time. But you have to try. If he didn't teach me that lesson, then Mine told me that lesson. You have to try. I loaded a bag full of those cans of oxygen, and I got in the car, and the driver realized my distress, and he asked what he could do to help. And I said, listen, don't run any lights, but if somebody wants to duck in front of you in traffic, don't let them. Don't stop unless you have to. And when you do stop, help me unwrap the plastic from these oxygen cans. They are what are keeping him alive. And very calmly, he did that, and I kept blowing the oxygen into Mishu's mouth and nose. And we made it there in 11 minutes, faster than the record time I'd ever made it to the hospital. The streets literally parted for Mishu. At the hospital, somehow I handed him off to the emergency room doctor, saying with an evenness I could not believe I could muster, my dog is dying. He has tetralogy of Fallot. And then they rushed him off. And then I briefed a second doctor on everything, including the human-like cry from Mishu and his resuscitation, and I told her he had been seen by a cardiologist there and told her which one, and she said, he's still here. I just saw him. I'll get him. So now Mishu was being worked on by one of the leading experts in canine cardiology in the world. And yet still I knew there was no hope. As they examined him, I managed to text Sue from the Maltese Rescue, and she came to the hospital too. And 3 of the people from other departments in the hospital who had met Mishu came down to the emergency room. Not for my sake, but for his. It was heartbreaking and yet uplifting at the same time. One of the ER doctors said, I think we should let him go. And I said, not in anger, not in competition, and certainly not boasting. I said, look, I understand that. I'd just like to note, with no training, I just brought him back from the dead. I suspect you guys are way better at this than I am, and I brought him somehow back from, he was getting cold. Just give him half an hour. And they all looked at me and said, yes. About half an hour later, his doctor, the cardiologist, came out to me and he said, he's alive, but if you took him out of this hospital, you'd get as far as the parking garage, and then you'd have to bring him back. What you heard when he cried out, that was him having a stroke. The oxygen deprivation was finally too much. And the doctor began to prepare me for the question about letting him go, and I stopped him and I said, I know. We've all done everything we can. Especially him, especially Mishu. I'm ready when you are. And they brought him back to me, and there was a drip attached to his arm. And when that toggle on the drip would be thrown, the medication in the container would end his life. He was as warm and as soft as ever in my arms, and yet I knew he was no longer in there. Sue held him for a while, and then she left me alone with him. I said what you would expect somebody to say in such a circumstance about love and happiness. And then I heard myself saying things about gratitude. Gratitude to him for teaching me that in the face of death, the point is to know when to try and when to say enough. And then he had taught me how to confront death and crisis and urgency, but with evenness and practicality, and to be able to say, I know you had a happy life. Then it seems like that, and not the fact that you had a happy life, but tragically not a long one, it seemed like the happy life was all that mattered to you. His cardiologist and the nurse came back into the room, and I said I was ready, and as the toggle was turned, I said I knew that if there was a place for him to go now, I was confident he would be the first one they let in. And I just hoped they'd let me visit him there someday. And then I hoped he would remember us. I said, good night, sweet prince and flights of angels, sing thee to thy rest. And he was gone. Again. And as I had prayed, when he died in my arms. He died in my arms twice. There are some postscripts, new since the first time I told you his story. His cardiologist very solemnly and respectfully said that of those other international experts who had reviewed Mishu's case, only 2 out of a couple of dozen of them had actually ever seen and been able to study a small dog with tetralogy of Fallot, and Mishu might have one final blessing yet to bestow upon the rest of us if they could keep and study his poor little heart. And without hesitation I said yes, because in that instant I saw him positioning his head on Stevie's head and his back paws on Rose's back legs, so that the 3 of them were cuddling together whether they liked it or not. And I knew, as I had always known, that this truly was a dog who cared about and loved other dogs. The hospital wound up recalibrating some of the cameras they had in the hospital to photograph the smallest teeth in the smallest dogs so they could get every imaginable image of Mishu's heart and maybe someday use them to fix this nightmare in some other dog. And since sometime, I think in 2022, Mishu has been in the veterinary textbooks. Moreover, in a casual conversation with someone from that cardiology department at the animal hospital over the summer, he mentioned Mishu. He recognized my name because of Mishu. And we talked about this awful disease, tetralogy of Fallot, and he said they had just months earlier in that hospital finally been able to successfully complete a surgery on a small dog who had that same fateful construction that took Mishu so young. If I remember what he told me correctly, they built this little dog a new aorta. Now, I'm not crazy or arrogant enough to draw a straight line from letting them keep Mishu's heart to that successful surgery, but I have no doubt that his heart continued the advance of knowledge of what science can do for cardiac patients. And not just canine cardiac patients. When I first got Stevie, the fellow who literally handed her to me at the pet shop was named Jeffrey. About 7 years later, I saw Jeffrey again, same shop, and he said he'd just gone back to work after months off, out sick, after heart surgery. And he said they did some experimental stuff on me, and then he laughed. Stuff they had tried out first on dogs. Isn't that amazing? Well, that's always the case. You don't wait to see if the drugs work on dogs because their lives are so short anyway, and you don't wait to do the surgery because their lives are so short anyway. And so you find new ways for dogs and for humans. I like to think Mishu will save other dogs, help save that one that the cardiologist mentioned, and save other kids too. Secondly, Mishu's parents had another litter late in the same year that he died, and their human was kind enough to offer me either of the brothers Mishu would never know. Each was eerily reminiscent of him, but healthy. So healthy that they were little devils. There's no other way to describe them. Sweet, innocent little Mishu was in some way sweet and innocent because he didn't have the strength to be a little devil like his brothers were. They were menaces to my other three dogs. I had each of them live a week with us, and I would have been fine with each. They were great just with me, but each of them bit Ted in the genitals, and then Stevie in the genitals, and Rose in the genitals, and one of them bit me in the genitals. You got to draw a line somewhere. They were crazy. And the second one, remember I mentioned how Mishu used to stand in his pen? The second one, Snowy, got into that same pen and managed to climb up the side of it and down the outside of it like an Olympic gymnast. They are now living happy lives as only dogs in other homes. So, when Sue from Maltese Rescue reached out again in June of 2022 and said, I've got another special case, 15-year-old, perfect health, but he's got rotting teeth and dementia. His human got sick and she died. Who's going to adopt a 15-year-old? I was able to raise my hand. And that was when Mine joined us. There's a third postscript. I got Mishu's tattoo a month after he died. And his pensive, half-smiling little face looks up at me from near the crook of my elbow, where he used to sit when I would carry him around after one of those pre-faints. And it is a remarkable likeness. There's one guy in the village who can absolutely do a portrait of your dog on your arm. To me, the tattoo means exactly what you would think it would mean. It comforts me greatly. It means Mishu is always with me and always will be. And now, with this being the week of this unwanted, but no, not tragic anniversary, Mishu, I hope, will also always be with you. I miss him to this day. And after Mishu, there was Mine, and I miss him to this day, the 17-year-old. Now we have Kit, the crazy puppy. It's quite a heritage. In any event, thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering him with me. Most of our Countdown music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of Countdown, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. Mr. Ray was on guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc., is the sports music. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed, including the interpretation of Beethoven you are hearing here. My announcer today was my friend Kenny Mayne, who will remind you that it tastes like chicken. Everything else was, as always, my fault. That's Countdown for today, day 3,301. I think that may be a typo. 301 of America Held Hostage. Some typos are really Freudian. And just 1,170 million days, another typo, until the scheduled end of Trump's lame duck and lame brain term, unless he is removed sooner by MAGA and Epstein, or that pavement on his hand, or stuck escalator, or Tylenol, or the mystery MRI. The next scheduled countdown is Thursday. Until then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.